Hi, my name is Ed Goad, and I'm an instructor at Green River College. In this video, we're going to cover the basics of how to configure SSH on a Cisco router. Now, SSH, or Secure Shell, is a wonderful service that allows us to manage and configure a network device across the network. As opposed to needing to be able to physically add a router or a switch or other network device and connecting via a console port, SSH allows us to do text-based configurations across an IP connection. That way we can be in a different room or even in a different country and continue to configure the devices. For this sample environment, we're going to be using this right here. We're going to follow through a couple of different steps in order to configure SSH on that ISR 4331. I'll show you what's necessary to be able to get things working and then ultimately how to configure SSH. When we're done, we'll use the SSH client on server A in order to connect it to the router and confirm that we're now able to work and make changes on that router across a network connection. So let's get started. Here's our network device, our network layout, and I'm going to go ahead and connect onto the router and go into the CLI mode. Now, as always, we need to start off by going into enable. So I will en and then into configuration mode. So conf t. To configure SSH, there are a couple of different prerequisites. The first off is that we need to configure the name of the router. And we need to not just configure the router name, but the fully qualified name. So first off, I will start by naming this. So I will host name and then give it a name. And in this case, I will call it router, but I'll call it lowercase router. As soon as I press enter, you'll see that that change has taken into effect and it is now a lowercase r as opposed to the uppercase R. That's the first part of a name. After that, we need the domain name. So I will say IP space domain dash name test.local. At this point, this router now has a fully qualified name of router.test.local. This is the equivalent of when you go to, say, www.greenriver.edu. www is the host name, greenriver.edu is the domain name. Now that the host name is set up, now we need to configure some passwords in this environment. First off, we need to specify AAA space new dash model. And this tells the router that we're going to be using some passwords specifically for SSH. One of the passwords I want to do is I want to create a user using the keyword username. And I'm going to create a user called Cisco. And I want to give it a secret password. So I will say secret. And then 0 telling it I'm going to be typing in the password in plain text. And in this case, I will give it a simple password of Cisco. This is a very bad username and password to be using in a production environment, but in this test lab, that should be fine. So I created a user called Cisco with a password of Cisco, and the password is being stored in a somewhat secure manner. The other password that I need to set up is the secret password, or I'm sorry, the enable password. Previously, when we ran enable, it took us straight into enable mode. In order to work across SSH, I need a password for that enable mode. So I will type in enable secret 0 and again Cisco. So I'll have a poor password for my enable secret. Last, now we need to actually configure SSH now that all the prerequisites are done. In order to work with SSH, I need to create an RSA key pair. So to do that, I crypto key generate RSA. So this will create an RSA key for me. It's going to start with 512 using the router.test.local name. I'm actually going to change that to 1024 and press enter. After I press enter a couple of times, it tells me SSH is now enabled. Last thing I want to do is I want to go into the input lines. So line VTY, the virtual terminals, 0 through 4. So 0 space 4. And I want to tell it transport input SSH. Only work over SSH. At this point, our SSH configuration is complete. Now let's just confirm that it's actually working. So I'm going to close the router and I'm going to go over to server A. On server A, I'm going to go to the desktop tab and we have all of these various options for me. If I scroll down, I will see that there is a telnet/SSH client that I can use to then connect up to the router. So I'm going to connect, asks me for the connection type. I'm going to choose SSH. The host name is the IP address of the interface on that router. So the 192.168.1.1. Then asks me for a username, and the user I created was named Cisco. So I will type in Cisco. Lastly, I click connect. And finally, it's connected and now asking me for a password. Cisco's, the username Cisco, I created with a password of Cisco. So I will go ahead and type that in. Even though I don't see the response on the terminal, it did actually get sent. I will press enter. And it takes me to the router prompt. At this point, I can now go into enable mode, EN, and it asks me for the enable password. Of course, I gave it the great super secret password of Cisco. Again, I don't see it on the screen, but I know I typed it and press enter. I'm now in enable mode and I can do a show run to be able to view the configuration. There is the enable secret in an encrypted format. There is the Cisco password stored in encrypted format and the rest of the configuration of my router. So there you have it, a basic introduction into using a Cisco router and configuring it for SSH and then connecting to it from a remote host.